For centuries before Europe entered the global stage, West Africa had already developed complex systems of power, trade, and knowledge that rivaled any civilization of its time. And at the center of this world stood the Mali and Songhai empires, not as mythical lands of endless gold, but as carefully organized states that understood something many later empires forgot: that wealth alone does not create power, but control over systems does. And this understanding emerged from geography itself, as the Sahel formed a narrow but critical bridge between the Sahara Desert and the fertile lands to the south, creating a natural corridor through which gold, salt, ivory, slaves, textiles, and ideas moved across continents, linking sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean world long before the Atlantic Ocean became the center of global trade. And in this environment, gold was not simply extracted and displayed, but managed through taxation, regulation, and security, allowing rulers to profit from circulation rather than depletion, a principle first perfected by the Empire of Ghana and then inherited, refined, and expanded by Mali in the early 13th century, after the fall of Ghana weakened regional stability, creating space for Sundiata Keita to unite fractious clans, defeat rival warlords, and establish a centralized authority that balanced imperial oversight with local autonomy, allowing diverse ethnic groups to maintain customs while contributing taxes and military service, a structure that stabilized trade routes, protected caravans crossing thousands of miles of desert, and ensured predictable revenue streams, which in turn funded administration, infrastructure, and diplomacy, transforming Mali from a regional kingdom into a transcontinental commercial empire whose influence rested not on direct control of gold mines, which remained locally managed, but on taxing gold as it moved north and salt as it moved south, recognizing that choke points, not ownership, determine power. And this system reached its most famous expression under Mansa Musa, whose reign symbolized Mali's integration into the wider Islamic and economic world, not merely through his immense wealth, but through his deliberate use of it, as his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 was not a display of excess, but a strategic act of soft power that announced Mali's permanence to global markets, scholars, and rulers, placing West Africa firmly within international consciousness as Musa distributed gold, built mosques, commissioned scholars, and established educational institutions that transformed cities like Timbuktu and Jannah into intellectual centers where law, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and theology were taught, debated, and recorded, producing manuscripts that circulated as intellectual currency equal in prestige as material wealth. Yet beneath this golden age lay structural vulnerabilities, as Mali's vast size made succession disputes difficult to manage, regional governors gained autonomy, and shifting trade patterns began to undermine the trans-Saharan routes that sustained imperial revenue, allowing the once subordinate Songhai people along the Niger River to arise by mastering river transport, military organization, and administrative discipline, first asserting independence and then expanding aggressively under Sani Ali in the mid-15th century, whose rule relied on military force, naval control of the Niger, and ruthless consolidation that brought key cities like Timbuktu and Jannah under Songhai control, though his methods alienated religious elites, a problem later addressed by Askia Muhammad, who transformed Songhai into one of the most bureaucratically advanced states of the pre-modern world by dividing the empire into provinces governed by appointed officials, standardizing taxation, regulating weights and measures, enforcing Islamic law alongside customary practices, and investing heavily in education and scholarship, recognizing that legitimacy required more than conquest. And under his reign, Timbuktu flourished as a center of learning, whose scholars corresponded with Cairo and Mecca, whose libraries preserved thousands of manuscripts, and whose reputation challenged European assumptions about African intellectual capacity centuries before colonial narratives erased them. Yet, even at its height, Songhai existed within a changing global system it could not control, as Atlantic trade routes redirected commerce toward European-controlled coastlines, reducing the importance of Saharan caravans, while technological imbalance emerged as firearms reshaped warfare, allowing Morocco, motivated by declining revenues and the lure of West African gold, to launch the 1591 invasion armed with muskets and cannons that shattered Songhai's armies at the Battle of Tondibi despite their numerical superiority, demonstrating that wealth without technological adaptation offered no protection. And while Songhai survived briefly in fragmented form, the centralized imperial system collapsed, marking the end of West Africa's dominance over trans-Saharan trade just as Europe's global expansion accelerated. Yet, the fall of Mali and Songhai did not represent failure or stagnation, but rather the closing of one global era and the opening of another, as their institutions, cultural practices, trade networks, and intellectual traditions persisted in regional states, merchant communities, and scholarly lineages that continued to influence West Africa long after imperial borders disappeared, revealing that these empires were never simply gold kingdoms destined to vanish, but complex civilizations whose rise and fall were shaped by geography, trade systems, political organization, and global shifts beyond their control, offering a lesson still relevant today, that economic power depends not on possession of resources alone, but on the ability to adapt systems to changing conditions, and that when global trade routes shift, technologies evolve, and external pressures mount, even the most prosperous societies must either transform or be overtaken, leaving behind not myths of lost riches, but evidence of human ingenuity, governance, and foresight that history too often ignored or deliberately erased.